how did you come to find those books, and what kind of benefits did you get from checking them out?
So those were the first books that I read when I went through my own transformation. So my military transition was pretty rough. And there's a couple of episodes before this, that we went into it, but let's just say this is the first that a listener's listening to. I had a pretty rough transition. Most people do. It's like in a military transition, it doesn't matter what your sticking point is, you're probably going to have one. So mine was not money. I was afraid I would run out of money, but I made good money when I got out. And in fact, I'm one of the fortunate people that made significantly more money, but still the bad man came. The darkness
Mhm.
came. Not understanding the world out there was the problem for me. Even though I lived in the world, right? It's not like I lived in an open bay barracks like on Full Metal Jacket for the 16 years I was in the military. We have houses, we have cars, we live in the world. But for some reason, getting out and changing the place where I get my paycheck from was this completely upsetting thing. And I've processed it so much that I realized that it was the quality of my teammates in the military that I was used to, the quality of my friends. So those people might be all kinds of things, right, on the wrong side, but on the side that I appreciate about them, they're dependable, they're reliable. The military is not a place where you cancel your appointments because
Mhm.
something came up. And that's all I saw in corporate world when I got there is people canceling, people moving things. Oh, sorry, something came up. Like, just doesn't happen in the military. And so I've actually distilled it to that. Trying to find your place in the world when you were once on this team where you knew where everybody stood. Even if you didn't like where they stand, you at least knew it. You knew that they would be there for you, even if maybe you guys don't like each other. You're still going to get the job done, right? Because it's about
Mhm.
mission at this point. I didn't experience that in corporate, right? I experienced everyone out for themselves. And I worked in sales, right? I was a banker. And so they said a lot, we're a family, but we're all competitors, right?
Mhm.
And so we were all complete competitors and we handled it well. It's not like it was fighting or whatever. In fact, it was a lot of passive aggression. And that
Mhm.
that is not what people did in the type of military that I served in. We were direct, probably to a fault. And so the things that I was rewarded for in the military are things I was expected to hide when I was in corporate. People couldn't handle directness, and it was just my default based on running a great career in the military. I made rank really quickly, quicker than most, because I figured out the game. And so I did not figure out the corporate game. And when I did, I realized it's not one I wanted to play. So I went to a smaller firm. I did the side hustle. So why Mickey Singer? I've came apart, right? All of this caused me to come apart. My use of alcohol has been inappropriate since I was 14,
Mhm.
but it was worse when you lose your footing in the world. That's what you grab onto. And so I was eventually melted down in front of the either wrong or the right respectable people, depending on how you subscribe to spirituality. I'd say right. But it was
Yeah.
very embarrassing, right? It was very embarrassing. And finally, the right teammate saw it in front of the right people that didn't know that I had this side. And she sat me down and said, "Hey, you need help." So I went and got that help. And the coach that they gave me at this retreat organization, it was a veteran operation that does psychedelic therapy for veterans. I got a great coach, right? I got a
Mhm.
great coach. He goes by Moose, and I had him for a year. And that was Mickey Singer's the first thing he proscribed to me, if you will, or prescribed.
Mhm.
And so I read the Untethered Soul. I liked it so much. I read the Surrender Experiment because
Mhm.
obviously, a barrel-chested freedom fighting special operator type is is not going to know what surrender is. It's going to be a trigger word. right? It's
Hmm.
like people saying let go to a person who got where they are in life by clinging to things.
Hmm.
So for some reason, who Mickey Singer is mattered to me. The interesting part is I didn't know that he was the CEO of WebMD until I read The Surrender Experiment. The Untethered Soul I actually really liked,
Yeah.
right? And that's more of a how-to spirituality. In fact, I think it's one of those that you can read as your first spirituality book. It
Hmm.
can be the only one you ever read if you read it over and over and over again. It's got range, is what we call it.
Hmm.
Because as your consciousness rises through deliberate work, then you'll start to open up, sort of like Jesus's parables, right? You can reach the lowest, most uneducated person, but it can also matter to the most spiritual, high consciousness, transcendent person, and they're pulling different things out of the same words, and that's why I like Mickey Singer.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, and hopefully the audience doesn't give me shit for this. Last podcast, you recommended his books to me, and then like literally right after that recording, someone gave me a copy of The Untethered Soul. Um, and I didn't actually finish it because, and maybe I should, but I didn't actually finish it because I felt like I had already been getting into meditation and I was already like able to cease my thoughts or it's for me when I meditate, it's not about stopping my thoughts, but what I do is I just don't keep adding to them. And when I don't go chasing after a thought, then all that chatter just kind of calms down and eventually stops. And so that works for me. But recently, someone gifted me for my birthday, which was just a few months ago, a copy of The Surrender Experiment. And I've been loving it. I haven't finished it yet because I'm a slow reader, but I'm almost done. But I've just been loving it, man. And for anyone who doesn't know what it is, it's basically like this guy who's a real person, Mickey Singer, who all he really wants to do, he's in grad school in the 70s and he discovers meditation. And for him, it really works. Like it gets him to this state of almost just bliss. And all he wants to do once he discovers he can do this is go to the woods and meditate in solitude. And somehow, like, people just keep showing up in his life and either wanting to meditate with him or either wanting to give him a job. And every time he tries to resist it, he surrenders to the flow of what life is presenting him. And it takes him on this like mind blowing journey of like becoming a spiritual leader and an author and like a multimillionaire. And yeah, I'm almost to the point where he starts WebMD. I don't think I got to the point where they say that it is WebMD, but
No, he doesn't. It's called medical management.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So he keeps getting acquired, and when he gets acquired, the acquirer makes him the CEO of the new conglomerate. It happens about three times. I think it's three times,
yeah.
but he's very good at like only paying out the information. So largely we're spoiling some of it, but the point
Yeah.
is like that's fine, right? Like
That's fine.
I spoiled it for you, and that's okay. But what it is it's social proof. It's social proof that people in high places can meditate and do woo-woo spiritual things without having to move to a mountain in India and put on natural fibers and wear beads in their hair, right? Like you can be a spiritual aspirant in a way that just isn't weird to the people who are not spiritual aspirants, right? And that's I
Mhm.
think what a lot of us in at least in my circle do is we're decidedly spiritual. We just don't go pushing our stuff on people that aren't interested in actually talking about it.
Would you say that you spiritual before you met Moose and before the surrender experiment and before plant medicine, or did that all come after?
No, in fact, I was vehemently agnostic means you sort of don't care. Like I was anti,
Oh, really?
which is, I mean, I wasn't, I was, it was all logic, right? It was like I was projecting my intelligence on people, which
Hmm.
is funny because when you do spiritual work, you raise your consciousness, your overall intelligence raises significantly. And that's happened with mine, and now it's laughable. I mean, I not only am I was Christian growing up. I became not Christian, right, when I discovered alcohol, women, and will, meaning will, right? I want to exert my will upon the world. And I thought, because I was driven and because I'm, above average intelligence, below amazing, Mensa's not knocking my door down. I read books and apply them. I'm smart enough to do that. I read books and I apply them in my life. And I talk to smart people that challenge me and don't buy my bullshit.
Hmm.
So, I have a great coach. I am a coach. I have a coach. I write coach software, right? I have an AI application that will help us scale our coaching to people that can't afford very expensive coaching, right? Like
Interesting.
we're trying to raise the consciousness of the world at level 7 because we know that a more conscious world is a better world. And so that's what all of our work is to do. But first, I have to get my shit together. We
Hmm.
call it being hollow bone. So I have to take on the problems of people dealing with some very difficult things. And I have to be okay with that. Well, if my stuff isn't clean, then it catches in their stuff and it makes it even harder. So that has been the most interesting thing is spirituality can actually raise your intelligence, which makes you better at things. Here's
Mm.
the big spoiler alert on level 7 high performance. By being spiritual, right, which just means the thing that runs your body. I mean, the fear that you have is part of your spirit. The intellect that you have is part of your spirit. The love you have for your family, your loved ones, your dog, your cat, that's part of your spirit, right? I'm not going to teach people to be great Christians, right? Unless they want to discover Christ consciousness. I can help with that, right? Like what people understand as Christ consciousness in another discipline in Buddhism and in Hinduism is simply called the true self. So I can help with that stuff, but as that stuff takes hold in your life, then your actual emotional and traditional intelligence actually raises. And that's why this stuff is important. And that's why Mickey Singer desired to drop out of life and ended up the CEO of a $4 billion company when WebMD actually either sold or went public. I can't remember which one. And he decided to run the Temple of the Universe full time and retire, is roughly at some point, obviously. So that's really the big thing about spirituality is how it can help you be a better performer in your whole life. But you have
Hmm.
to apply it to every part of your life, which most people are frankly not willing to do.
When you coach someone, do you typically direct them to be more spiritual, or do you direct them to be more spiritual without telling them that's what you're doing? Or maybe it depends case by case.
Yeah, this I'm gonna focus on semantics the way that you're asking, but not because you asked the wrong question. It's actually really helpful that you ask it this way. I don't direct them to do anything
Mm.
because I'm not powerful enough for that, right? I'm not that wise. I can't pick people's trajectory, but they're wise enough to do it with the right opening processes. So my process is designed to open them so they can clearly see what they want.
Hmm.
Most of the time, and I shouldn't say most, I'd say half the time, people don't know the dream that they want to go toward. And that's the first thing they have. They hire me because they don't even know the dream they want. They're 43 years old. They've been working in this career for X period. They're a high earner. They're high stress. They're a high performer by their own definition, but their relationships are struggling. They're not sleeping right. They're either above the weight they want to be or below it, depending on who you are. It's like all the parts of their lives are more frazzled and disconnected than they want to be. This helps connect it back in. Once you're back connected, you can see what the superfluous parts are and you can let them go. Nothing needs to be destroyed. Nothing needs to be killed, right? You hear about ego death. No one's killing the ego. You can't do that, right? It isn't possible.
Yeah.
God the nature provider or our parents, it's all in there, and there's nothing there. We're not broken. We're just out of balance. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, how do you get, like, we're all like, oh, my work is everything and my family deserves to be provided for and all that. Like, that's all ego.
Mm.
I'm like, oh, wait a second. No, you taking care of my family's ego? Yes, taking care of your family is ego. Right? I had a client, I had a client that was like, my wife's been giving me some crap about not getting that second home built. I'm like, yeah, that's stressful, is it? To have a second home on a lake, like, to not have that, super in my head, right? Because I'm still a
Uh-huh.
human.
Uh-huh.
I'm still a human, but when you work through it, you're just like, wow, I just totally hid my own desire underneath my family's desire. I get this sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, my business isn't doing that great. What if I have to sell my house and take my kids out of school, right? And this happens to be the most expensive school in town. Well, is that really that bad? Do your kids have a right to go to a school that costs $40,000 a year each for two children? Or, like, what, we just help them sort through that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we tend to hide our own materialistic leanings underneath something that's unassailable, which is generally family and work. Oh, I can't. I'm
Mhm.
sorry. I got to move my lunch with you. Something came up at work. Did it? Because me and my military buddies that are out now know how to navigate our whole lives without ever moving an appointment.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. I never thought about what you just said, how, m- you know, maybe I'm sitting here saying, "Oh, I want to provide for my family. I need to earn more so I can provide for others." But maybe it's actually my own ego underneath that wants to feel, like I've got all this stuff and I've got all this money and like all this cool adult toys, and I'm hiding it under like the guise of wanting to provide for others.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
would you say? I like how you said we're not killing the ego, but we're bringing things into balance. What would you say is the other side of ego? Like, what are we balancing?
That's a fine question. We like to think that balance is on a seesaw, right?
Hmm.
Like, there's two things, light and dark, wrong and right, things like that. There's
Hmm.
significantly more than that, by the way that I understand. The process that I use, it looks more like a plus sign, right? Like,
Mm.
the balance on the top and bottom is conscious, unconscious, right? There's a lot of things are happening with us from the unconscious. I no kidding. I always ask people where they get their wisdom from. What do you read? How do you learn? And I ran into a guy that at a campsite that we were at when we were serving a client. In fact, my wife went with me. We were serving the University of Texas lacrosse team in a national tournament. So we have an Airstream camper and we like to do that instead of hotels. And so we did that, and we were at this campsite, and this man was meditating in the campsite next to us. And we spoke up a conversation, and I asked him what he's reading right now. And he said, "You're going to laugh at this, but I actually watch videos of on a man that believes he is channeling extraterrestrials."
Is it Bashar?
It is Bashar. There are
Okay.
more of them, but I mean, when I first heard this inside, because I've gotten to this point where I don't scoff at people. I've got some leanings that people would probably scoff at. So, in the spirit of not doing to people what they don't want done to them, I don't scoff at people. But inside, I'm
Nice.
like, oh boy, okay,
Yeah,
right, okay, extraterrestrial guy.
he's
And
got a
so,
shtick.
but here's the thing: like, this was my lesson. Was I had to take a moment, and somehow or another, naturally speaking, my wife started talking, right? And that gave me time to think while they were talking.
Hmm.
And so I got it together, and then it was naturally my turn. I was like, well, hey, Sean, what is it you're learning from this man that channels extraterrestrials? And he laid out a bunch of things. And I was like, no, that's just good wisdom, man.
Mm.
Such as good stuff. And so what I realized, and it's stuff I recognize through the sources of wisdom that I get, and it lined exactly up, right? It lined
Yeah.
exactly up. So that was a lesson from what I call a single serving friend. If you're a Fight Club fan, that taught me something very profound, and that is the unconscious is informing all of us. Some people think it comes from God, others think it comes from ancestors, other thinks it comes from their intelligence or their intellect. It doesn't
Hmm.
matter to me where you get your wisdom from. It all comes from the unconscious, and the unconscious speaks in riddles and it speaks in images, and it's very hard to understand, right? So to
Yep.
balance the conscious, you and I are consciously talking, we know where
Hmm.
we are in time and space, and we're sitting here today doing this. That's consciousness. Unconsciousness is the wisdom of the universe, as well as the harder stuff, right? Like the selfishness and things like that all come from the unconscious as well, and it's sort of chaos down there, if you will. So we want to balance that. You have dreams that teach you things. The best place that the conscious and the unconscious are in the same place for a period of time are dreams and psychedelics. So
Fascinating.
you can put yourself into an 8 hour psychedelic thing a lot easier than you can guarantee that you're going to dream. But
Hmm.
when you have dreams, it's like, why was I wearing that on a purple horse? Well, I don't know. There's a message from your unconscious. Let's pull it out. Let's figure out what that could mean. So to finally land the plane on, on your question is conscious, unconscious on this axis. Then on this side is the sensation, right? Or science mind,
Uh-huh.
also known as the left brain. And then on the other side, you've got intuition or creativity, right?
Hmm.
These to me are the most important four. There's actually more than that. This can be found in like Carl Jung's work,
Uh-huh.
but all these things need to be in a balance, and then it rolls like a wheel, right? Like if these are balanced with these, then it rolls like a wheel. If one of those things gets extended, such as in the Christian cross, it is now out of balance, right? And so
Fascinating.
Christians took a we've been seeing people have been seeing in their dreams plus signs in societies that didn't know one another before we were global.
Yeah.
So what Carl Jung's work was for many years was around symbols that many people see that have not met each other, right? That all
Yeah.
comes from what's called the collective unconscious. So
Hmm.
what are the things, and this is where I spend my time in my work, is what are the things that we share in common simply by virtue of the fact that we have a human spirit? Right? What do I have
Fascinating.
in
Yeah.
common with a pygmy from Papua New Guinea? Well, I'm
Yeah.
a man, I have a spirit, and underneath of the light that would be my spirit is covered with all these little lenses, right? I'm American, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a, you know, card carrying Democrat, if that's your political leanings. I don't have political leanings.
Uh-huh.
So I was raised decidedly right wing, but I don't currently have any political leanings. And so all those are little lenses that cover your light, and
Okay.
they can make it dimmer if you don't know why you have those lenses. So
Hmm.
we're in the business of getting those lenses down to as few of them as possible so it stops diffusing or blocking your light. Spirits only work a certain way, whether you're from Papua New Guinea or America. The spirit roughly works the same way, and that's how I help balance all of that for the person.
So, yeah, this is fascinating. It's like the lenses are like the different identities or
Yeah,
programming that we carry. But what is the commonality? What is the common light? What can you define that spirit that kind of links me and you and someone from Papua New Guinea?
sure. Yeah. I mean, there's when you study this stuff deeply, you realize like a pygmy from Papua New Guinea may not even use numbers, right?
Hmm.
There's a little known culture down in the Amazon called the Piraha, and they don't use numbers at
Hmm.
all. They don't count things, right? And so we think that the Western world is more advanced. I'd say, yeah, maybe in some ways, but we still have spirit. We're still afraid. We still want what we want to get what we want, and we don't want to get what we don't want. This goes back to Mickey Singer, right? Like we'll have this thread through here. Mickey says this in his lectures, which There are like 20 hours of lectures that he's published on Audible. I think it's called Living in Surrender, which are wonderful. You can put them on in the car and just like commute with them. And if you
Mhm.
space out, it's great. You come back, he's still saying cool stuff and it's funny.
It's and
But
for
it's,
those listening, it's Mickey Singer.
yeah, Mike. Yeah, his name's Michael A. Singer. So he goes by Mickey. So if you search it, you may want to try Michael Singer.
Michael
But
Singer.
yeah, but anyways, what he says a lot, and I like, is we spend all of our life once we become conscious, getting what we want, grabbing pleasure, avoiding pain, right? And so then we think that pleasure is virtue. Anything that brings us pleasure is virtue. This is what I learned in corporate, right? Like, of course, I'm going to have to bail out on you, Nate. Like, this other opportunity is going to make me money. So you get it, right? And I'm thinking to myself, no, I don't get it. What I
Yeah.
get is that you left me hanging for something that benefits you, right? It's like in society, we've switched virtue, right? Virtue is switched to this place where it's like we only understand each other if we're willing to forsake each other at pretty common and very frequent areas. I've never been let down so much as when I was at corporate and when I was a business developer, because the clients I was calling on and the people I wanted to make clients, like they're so wealthy, like they don't really need a banker, but they probably want one. And so when they're like, "Hey, I'm running this business that I'm trying to sell, and I've got this meeting with like the 15th wealth manager that's contacted me this week. He's nice enough. Heard he was from SEAL Team 6. I'll probably take the lunch. Oh, I just got a vendor that called me and is offering a 10% discount on the 6,000 tons of steel I'm going to need next year. Sorry, Nate, you get it, right? Like my
Yeah.
answer is no, I don't get it,
Yeah.
right? Like I don't understand. And
Uh,
then so that's not the right answer. So I suffered and suffered, like, why is this happening to me? Right. And the answer is because you're doing a job you don't love, Jack.
mm,
Right. So that was what I was doing is I was focusing on the money that I made instead of doing great work for the world.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So it's all a matter of what you're looking at as your goal. If your goal is money, chances are you're not going to get it. But if your goal is work, right, meaningful work that changes the world, what in some way, even if it's the world of the 10 people that you serve, you want to change the world in some way. You want to do work that's so enamoring to you that you can't not do that work. Like that's the
Mm,
world that I live in. And the people that I coach typically want to get on this model,
mm.
whether they know that's what they want or not. They're typically following energy, right? They're introduced to me through somebody that I helped get this, and they're like, hey man, I never can imagine what my life would have been like unless I met Nate. And then that person will come in the meeting with me and I do a discovery call with them where I coach them, for no cost for 2 hours and just let them feel it, right? You and I have done this.
Yep.
So, I try to do it with anybody who's even curious, right? Just to show
Yeah.
them a different way of seeing the world. It's my 2 hours to give, right? If somebody
Yeah.
wants
Yeah.
to take it, I'm willing to give it.
Yeah.
So, to answer your actual question, yeah, I mean, I was on the wrong model. I was just I was always willing to work hard. I grew up blue collar, but working hard with a shovel and working or a pickaxe or my first job was in the cornfields in Nebraska when I was 12 years old. We all had that job. It's called detasseling. So working hard is not hard for me, but identifying and believing in my work was hard. Like I just helping wealthy people get more wealthy I don't think is a judgment that I think is wrong. It just wasn't a good fit for me
Yeah.
because
But
those
you were,
wealthy people are humans and they deserve good bankers.
yeah.
I was there to make a lot of money, not be really into it. And I knew this. I knew I had done wrong when COVID happened. I went home to learn banking alone in my house on Zoom. And I would read for hours investment products and investment theories, and it wouldn't stick. It's like
Mm,
and I was trying to regurgitate it at a client meeting or whatever, and it wasn't there. I'm just
mm-hmm.
like, oh no, why isn't this stuff sticking?
Now, but you were doing well though, weren't you? Like financially,
Yeah, oh yeah.
you were
Yeah.
crushing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was until the crash after COVID happened, right? And so what ended up happening on that was I had a great year. In fact, I think I was the top associate, right? Meaning the start level employee in that pay grade. So
Yeah.
I think for that year, 2020, I was the top associate. I had some really cool wins. Maybe I was lucky, I don't know. But the second year I was there, I ended up not making my numbers. And it was because interest rates started going up significantly. And what happens on the scorecard is what they call it, like how you're measured is the money that I manage, which was right around 150 million.
Whoa.
If they pay off a line of credit with money that's in cash or in investments, it goes down double. So if they pay off a $2 million line of credit with $2 million of cash or investments they have, that's a $4 million hit for me.
Oh, so you
So
want them to have the credit out there?
yes,
Oh, I
that's
see.
but so banking for successful business people is entirely different than the banking that middle class and lower. I'm telling you, it's why they are where they are. They
Hmm.
build businesses, they're born that way, or they do great in corporate, right? But most of the time, it's the first two. It's very, very difficult to get wealthy having a job.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
And so like Jamie Dimon has done it, and my mentor was the CEO of many companies at Unilever. He's done it, right? He started in the food industry and he worked his way up, and he did get to pretty wealthy by stock options and things like that. But it's rare,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
You've To navigate bureaucracy is an entirely different skill than starting a business, as you very well know, is being an entrepreneur with this podcast, right? It's different to work for Sean Ryan or to go work for Joe Rogan or or Andrew Huberman or David Sensa, the Founders Podcast, than it is going to be to start your own.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so it's that mindset difference is the usually the area that I'm working with because I've been both. And
Hmm.
I'm a effectively a spiritual coach to help people get better at all of their life. It doesn't matter to me whether they're corporate or business owners. They're just going to have a much more independent mindset if they're either born into money or they're entrepreneurial.
Hmm. Hmm. Have you had many clients who have started out like they're entrepreneurial, but they're not crushing it yet, and then they go through that transformation, or is it most of your clients coming in like people who were born with money or who are already crushing it, but feel something missing in their life, and that's when they come to you?
Yeah, you know what? I have a mixed bag. It's not always a product of things not being right. Sometimes and here's the question you're really asking is what causes a person to consider, mental performance is a thin, I'm just going to give the answer. Mental performance is a thin veneer for being a spiritual coach.
Hmm.
So, I have a business card, our website, it's all non-weird, what other people would call weird. We're sensitive to that, right? I
Yeah.
remember when I first started, my Moose looked like Jesus. He still does. Long hair, beard, like you're ready for that. But I know his background. He was once a Navy SEAL.
Uh-huh.
So that was important to me, right? It was important that he had walked in my shoes. And that's why I think most of my clients hire me is I've walked in shoes like theirs.
Hmm.
I tell them all the time, I am a patient in this asylum. I am not wearing a white lab coat because if I had a white lab coat on, people will both trust me because I do, and they won't trust me because I do. I'm
Hmm.
interested in those who don't trust people with white lab coats on because
Hmm.
they're typically more apt to the coaching world rather than the psychology or the organizational behavior, self help, science produced kind of world.
Hmm.
Spiritual coaching is entirely dependent on faith. If you need to be proven that this works, I've got cases and testimonials and stuff, but it's still not proof, right? There's not a scientific proof. This is what the coaching world is actually suffering from because psychology departments won't study it and therefore there is no data, right? So
Mhm.
right now I work at a university as a staff coach, as a contract coach in their MBA program, a very good MBA program. And their big study is coached teams are better than uncoached teams.
Sports teams.
No, MBA teams, like
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Master of Business Administration.
Yeah, yeah.
So that, I mean, it's like you and I can sit here and be like, obviously, a coached team is going to be better than an uncoached team, but that's not scientifically rigorous. There
Mhm.
has to be data done in a rigorous way. If you're a scientist, I'm not that interested in it. I don't care what's been proven scientifically because we're the balance to scientific, right? And so
Yeah.
people, a lot of times I get clients that tried therapy and it just didn't work for them. Now, I'm not against therapy. I just know that I hear that a lot. I don't
Mhm.
even really have an opinion about therapy because we're not in the same space. Therapy is
Mhm.
in the space of helping people go from dysfunction to function. And I'm sure they're very good at it. I went to
Yeah.
therapy when I was in special ops. You know, I'd been shot, I was in a bad spot. And the only thing I knew to do was walk into in the psych department to the first open door. And I
Mhm.
had a great therapist. He did a wonderful work with me. I'm very happy about it, but I was never sure what we were doing.
Okay.
Like I had a place to go and rant and rave and he would be like, hey, maybe you should read this book. Like it was always, he had a very light touch. I'm a big move forward guy, right? High performers, most of them want to make sure they're moving forward. And that's what coaching does. Whether you're an executive coach, a career coach, there's 800 types, life coach, there's tons of types, but it's all about moving forward. Momentum is key because we want you to not need us forever. We want to send you into your life transformed, career change if you're going to a career coach, so on and so forth, life coach, help you just right side your life and things like that, whatever the coach's definition is. Yeah,
I'm
so
wondering, because we started off talking about Mickey Singer and
mhm,
spirituality and a tiny bit about your spiritual journey, and
sure.
I've been kind of taking notes as we go along. One of the things that you touched on was Christ consciousness, or some people would call it the true self.
Yeah.
And I want to circle back to that because I think that that doesn't get talked about enough. And I'm just curious, like, can we define that a little bit for the audience?
Yeah, I'm actually going to. Mickey Singer does this better than anybody I've ever seen. And like part of what spiritual coaching and being spiritual in general, at least by my view and the other people that are in my circle, we call it mutual orbit, right?
Mhm.
Like we're not sure how we ended up in this orbit, but none of us want to leave it, so we don't, right? Is it gravity or is it? We don't know. Doesn't matter. We're in a mutual orbit.
Yeah.
But Mickey puts this well. It's like, you're in there. Where are you? And it's funny when you hear it more, you get it. But he's like, try this exercise, for example. And this is going toward the true self. If you put your hand in front of your face like this here, and you're like, I have a hand, right? It's right here. But am I my hand? Is this me right here? No, it's my hand.
Hmm.
So I have an ego, but I am not my ego. I am the one watching, right? And
Hmm.
Mickey says this 1,000 times in the lectures. It's awesome. That's why I like them. They're repetitive, but it's subtly different each time. So I have an ego, but I am not the ego. It's a part of me, but I am not only the ego. I'm also the shadow. Which is another, Jungian part of the personality.
Hmm.
I'm also the inner child. I'm the wounded child. I'm also which the wounded child and the protector. God dang it, the inner child. Either way, there's the wounded child and the protective child. I'll think of the real term. There's a great psychologist named Terry Real that writes about this. The the protector is there to protect the wounded child, right? And these are all parts of the unconscious, right?
Hmm.
So this all circles around. So I am not only wounded child, I am not only protective child, I'm not only ego, I'm not only shadow, I'm all of these, and they're all happening in some kind of proportion. We also have feminine energy. That was the hardest part for me to understand, right? Barrel chested, freedom fighting, special boat operator did not understand why I needed to embrace an inner feminine. And I reacted badly when my spiritual coach suggested that I get my feminine energy in balance. I actually swore and ranted and like, what are you what? And he's like, oh, you're gonna do it. And I'm like,
Yeah,
no,
how
I'm
did
not.
how does one do that?
Well, he's a very good coach, right? And it's called seed planting. So
Okay.
he planted a seed and he told me I planted a seed. Like he's so good. His name's Sean Hansen. If any of y'all want to look him up, Reloaded Coaching is he's out of Boulder, but he also has a very nice podcast
Okay.
that is worth looking at. But anyways, he's like, it's time to work on your feminine energy, and I'm like, no, it isn't. I don't even know. He's like, well, I know you're going to, so that's cool. I'm like, but I'm not. And he's like, you are. And this is what happened. I'm not skewing this. And I remember thinking, like, why is he so sure of himself? And we got off the call. Next morning in meditation, guess what I was doing?
Getting in touch with your feminine side?
Yep. So he planted the seed. He knew and the reason he did that is we already had rapport. He already knew that what I call the shape and the trajectory of my journey, or at least for that period. So he knew the tool to use at that point was to plant a seed. We have
Mm-hmm.
lots of coaching tools, and it just matters of where the person is. They don't all apply equally to every human. So seed planting is a way to get a person to move towards something without allowing their ego to fight it directly.
And just to put a cap on the Christ consciousness thing, that is more so that would be basically the awareness that you're not one of these things, but you're all of them. But
Yeah.
even beyond that, you are the observer of all of these pieces.
Yeah, you're the one watching. So one of the things Mickey uses is like, I have a mind. So your hand's out of your face. Because if you like chopped a hand off and there was no hand anymore, does that mean I cease to exist?
Hmm.
No, I'm a human with one missing hand. So the Christ consciousness piece is the true self, right? And there are biblical scholars that in fact it's so widely accepted, it's the default to know that none of the characters in the Old Testament lived, that they're all a metaphor, because none of the timeline is accurate, and none of the scientists are like, yeah, that there's no way that happened, because that didn't happen for another 1,000 years after that. So whatever they were claiming, we also forget the Bible was written by men. It wasn't like
Hmm.
God sat at a typewriter just knocking this stuff out. You know what I'm saying? Which is
Uh-huh.
why there's a lot of like misogyny and a lot of like inequality in here in the Bible, is because it was written by men. It was written by people who haven't, like, that's how they saw the world at that time. Let's not
Right.
forget that slavery was not only normal and legal, everybody had them except the slaves themselves, including our heroes in the Bible. They all had slaves, right? So
Mhm.
times were the times.
Yeah.
But Christ consciousness is the true self within ourself that lines up with the character that the men were trying to paint as Jesus, right? Some people believe that.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't, whatever the scholars are arguing about does not matter to me, whether he lived or didn't live. Christ consciousness is what we're after. Christ
Hmm.
spoke in parables. He almost never even mentioned God, right? It's a way of folding your own attention back on itself to where it's like shining a flashlight on itself. It's very hard to do, right?
Yeah, it's
So,
fascinating.
and so Mickey goes over this a lot. Like, you are in there. Hello, if I were to say to you, picture a boat in your head. Now you're picturing a little boat, a bigger boat, a ship, right? It's all, you just did it, right? You're thinking of a
Right, right.
ship right now. You can't not do it. It's the elephant trick. It's whatever. Don't think of a pink elephant. So you are in complete control of your mind.
Right,
I'm gonna
right.
I'm gonna tell you right now. Don't think of a boat. Nah, you just did, right? So you're in there watching this happen. You're not the mind. You have a mind.
Right.
That's the Christ consciousness. Is the Christ consciousness deals with all those other characters around it. It deals with the shadow. It deals with the inner child. and the protective child, and all those the different I call them characters when I work with people.
Yeah.
Oftentimes they give them names so we can isolate the part of them that is out of balance.
Yeah.
And so if we were to be looking at the ego, we joke like we want to throw, if we're all in the clown car, let's assume it's like a Chevy Suburban. Right now the ego's driving that car and it's doing crazy things, man. Like we're doing donuts in the snow, we're taking this thing off some jumps out, out in the country, but you're in the true self is in the passenger seat, like what in the hell is happening here, and who are these people? And then you start to look at the ego. What we want to do is move the ego to like the back row. We want it there. The
Hmm.
ego's there. It's the one you call Jeff, it's the one I call Nate. It's our identity, right? And
Yeah.
it keeps us alive. It's the thing that it keeps us alive. It's generally focused right on the amygdala, right? The part of the
Hmm.
brain that houses our survival instinct is in the amygdala.
It does have a function in that regard.
Absolutely, it has a
Yeah.
function. So if we killed your ego, you wouldn't remember who you are. Right. So this stuff is just not practical in the kind of new age. I run into this with a lot of new age people that don't acknowledge the darkness, right? The
Mhm.
Christ consciousness, the true self, whatever language you want to use from whichever discipline, whichever thing that you're into. If a man has written a book about wisdom, this goes back to the spirit. There are so many signposts in our society, in our consciousness, that point us toward this true self. J.R.R. Tolkien books, our hero's journey books, the movie The Matrix, all Star Wars movies. These are all movies we like because it shows the shape of the inner journey as well,
Mhm.
right? So I act as a Yoda or a Morpheus for people to go inward, which is a very scary place to go. So I'm in there like, hold on, like if we're in the dark cave, you and me, I'm your coach for a second. I've got a flashlight and we're spelunking. So you've got one of those cool helmets on with the flashlight on it, and we're going around, and you might see something. You're like, hey Nate, what do you make of that? And I train my light over there. I'm like, man, that looks really interesting. Like, what's so interesting to you about that, Jeff? And
Mhm.
then you'll talk, 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 talk. Like, I had a bad experience when I was a kid around this thing we're looking at. Well, how are you carrying it now? Well, I haven't thought about that, right? And we're both got our flashlight on the thing. You're like, okay, well, we dealt with that. You've let it go. Now what? And we're back in the cave, and I see something, right? Like, oh my goodness, that looks really interesting. Jeff, take a look at this. What do you make of this? And you train your cool little miner's flashlight thing on it, right? But the thing we're doing together is allowing you to see it, right? Allowing all the different characters to see this separately, and in hopes to turn the reins over to the true self rather than the ego or the protective child or the wounded child. Because when each of these characters grabs the wheel, you're not in control anymore.
Mhm. Mhm. So, do you think on a coaching question, did your coach like get a certification of some kind? And I'm guessing you did. And is that required? Like, does someone who's going to be a coach, can they just do it if they're just like really smart and successful already and they can just do it? Or is it important to get a certain type of like training or accreditation or something like that?
Yeah. So this is one of the more interesting things about the industry is it's a very low barrier to entry,
Hmm.
right? That anybody you can go there are coaching courses you can take that are free. I'm not sure what their gig is. I've not looked. But they're everything from free coaching to $150, get certified. I don't know how they're making money because getting certified is difficult. But there are a couple of governing bodies for coaching. There's one in Europe. I don't even know the name of it because it's
Hmm.
not important to me. But there's one called the International Coaching Federation. If a person does want to go toward, I'm going to be very careful with this term, legitimacy, then the ICF is the closest you can get to it, right?
Okay.
ICF certification, it is difficult. You have to do, I did like 160 hours of education. Then I also had to get 100 hours of coaching experience. I had to
Wow.
take 2 practical exams. I mean, it is and a standardized exam that took 3 hours. I've taken it twice because there are 3 certifications. I have there it's associate, professional, and then master. I have
Mhm.
professional, but each time you go up, you have to take the test again.
Okay.
So, and you have to submit your hours. So you have to have 1,000 hours to go to professional coach. And so what becoming a coach is, to quote my friend Terry Liskovich, anybody with a hat and a clipboard can become a sports coach, especially in the youth level, right?
Right.
Anybody with 150 bucks and a desire to do something can become a coach. It's very similar to being a real estate agent. You can
Mm.
go to a strip mall place or even an online group, take all the exams for the state that you're in, and you can be a real estate agent. And that qualifies you to go to the nearest broker and pay them money to work there.
Mhm.
Right. This is how coaching works as well. If you want to be a staff coach, you're going to top out at 100 grand or so, maybe 150 if you've been doing it a long time. So if you want to go out on your own and you want to do work with corporations, certification is the way to go. But I know many good coaches that have no certifications. And what they did to get their notoriety is, one, they were probably somebody before they became coaches. A lot of
Right.
people used to be oil and gas leaders, whatever, here in Houston, oil and gas, or bankers or whatever. That's sort of what I have going on.
Yeah.
If you become a coach like straight out of college or something, that's going to be a longer road, right?
Mhm.
Because you don't have applicable experience toward who you're looking at. So it is very unregulated. It's kind of the wild, wild west as far as coaching goes, but legitimacy is important
Mhm.
regardless of how you get it. The
Yeah.
ICF is one way to get it. Having a former life is one way to get it. Starting in a niche, some people will say you've got a niche down. So if you're the guy that helps women leaders in the food and beverage business, you probably have a really good niche because you went from trying to teach anybody anything to now you look like one of the only people that has that as a niche rather than one of the other 70,000 coaches that says they can coach anybody on anything.
Yeah, I think you've got an interesting trajectory slash resume that led you to being a coach, considering you've got the military experience, you've got which you had success in, you've got success in the banking industry. Then, of course, I like it because you've got the spirituality and the plant medicine side. And then after all that, you became a coach. So I think that's a pretty solid resume. I'm curious if you'll go for you have the ICF professional certification. Will you go for the final hurrah and get the master's level?
I will. I
Yeah.
will. And the reason why I will is because this actually will just be kind of funny. I took the test to become an ACC and I did okay. You had to get a 485 out of 600 and I'm sorry, 465. I got a 485, right? So I'm barely scraped by. And I was like, woo, and I got certified to ACC. And then when I had enough hours to go to PCC, I had to take the same test again. So I went into my AI engine and I created an ability to study in there and I realized how little I knew. It
Mm.
was wild. I didn't even know the 8 core competencies. So it's like I bamboozled the system, which, is only sort of funny. And because I am a good coach and I always have been, I've been a good coach since I was a student, right?
Hmm.
For the people that were hiring me. So my first client is a very wealthy person from Houston. And that person that hired me knew I was new to coaching. So it's not he wanted a new coach. He didn't want a coach with 25 years of experience. He wanted somebody who's just a couple of steps ahead of him.
Hmm.
Right? The last person to go through that big scary gate is the first person he wants to help him go through that gate.
Hmm.
And that's sort of why I had early success in the industry is I had literally just like took the gun away from my own head and put it back in the drawer and got behind my own life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I help other people do what I first had to do myself, and I went to great expense for it, right? People so oftentimes don't like my price. I personally paid $80,000 to go through with my coaching course, the 60,000 I paid, and I would pay it 100 times out of 100 again. I wasn't even
Oh,
sure how. I mean, I had the money in investments and I
mhm.
was prepared to spend it, but somehow or another fate came in and made sure I was able to pay for it out of my earnings, my coaching earning mixed with my, you know, I got paid very well at the banks that I worked at. And so, I just, when you give your life over, when you surrender, back to Mickey Singer,
Yeah.
life will take care of you. The world is trying to support you. You have to let it. The thing is, we don't let the world support us. We think, it's like digging up seeds every 2 days to see if they're growing, right? You're hurting the seeds if you dig them up, right? You have to have
Mhm.
faith that this is going in the right direction. So I had to have faith too. I had to have faith that even though my second year at the bank was not nearly as comfortable as my first, while going through this transformational coaching, while doing all this, going through letting my last marriage didn't make it, and it was because of my behavior up to the point where we called it off. I
Mhm.
wasn't even my new leases on life were a little too late, and come to find out 3 years 4 years after that, it's way better, right? We're happier apart, right? We were
Uh-huh.
never a great fit in the first place, and we both had to come to grips with that by both going through this process.
Do you think, because we started on the Mickey Singer books and you mentioned them again just now, do you think that Untethered Soul and or Surrender Experiment were a big catalyst for where you are now? And if so, is there something you can say about each of those books or both of them combined? Like, what is like a big lesson and takeaway that helped you on your journey and get to where you are now?
They were some of the first two books I read when I started reading about this stuff. I definitely in two of the first five. The
Hmm.
other notables are the not Surrender Experiment, Power of Now and New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, which
Okay.
are like, if Mickey Singer is 101, then Eckhart Tolle, once you can digest Mickey, then you go to Eckhart, which is probably 201 or 301, right?
Okay.
Eckhart is a little bit woo woo, is what we call, right? It's a little, my intellect would not let it in. My ego
Hmm.
would definitely not let it in. So I listened to these or listened to the lectures and read the books. So Untethered Soul and Surrender Experiment, they cover the same material. One of them is a story, right? So if you learn in story form or in biography form, then that is going to be a good fit for you, right? You're going to see what it's like for a very smart, driven, and very confused person as they surrender to the plan of the universe. On the flip side, Untethered Soul, I think, is a very good book about the anatomy of the human, right? The human spirit, and also how to surrender.
Hmm.
So it puts in very cool little almost parables, right? Like one of the parables from the Untethered Soul you might remember is, let's say you get a thorn in your arm,
Yep.
and instead of pull it out, you don't want to deal with it. You don't want to go through that pain again, so you put pad around it, and then that padding starts to fall off, so you put tape around it. Right now you've got padding, you've got tape, and then the tape starts to fray, so you get more tape. You just keep stacking stuff around this thorn that's in your arm instead of going to the work and the like quick chronic, or excuse me, acute pain of pulling it out. Right.
Hmm.
Untethered Soul is very good at laying out the anatomy of surrender and how the spirit can sort of wrap itself around the idea of surrender.
Very cool. So I'm curious, we're getting close to the end of our time. What do you got going on now? You mentioned you're working on some AI stuff. You want to tell me a little bit about that? I'm fascinated by the whole new world of technology and AI, and so maybe you can educate me about that, or what do you got going on with that?
AI is so neat. And I think there are three schools of thought here, right? That sounds scary. It's going to end up Skynet. That's cool. I thought that too. I literally thought, oh my God, Amazon. Every time I order on Amazon, I'm like, I'm going to end up fighting the machine someday. chances are I'm going to be too old, so I'm going to end up being an advisor to John Connor, assuming they got us like a special ops arm or something,
You'll be his
right?
coach.
But I honestly thought that. I was afraid of technology. Then there's the people that are like, hell yeah, technology, bring it on. And then there's the people that are like, technology or no technology, like that doesn't matter to me. I don't need to use AI because, if you have a phone, you're going to be using AI, period.
Hmm.
But, predictive text is AI. That's how they've developed AI. It's all statistics. Based on the three letters that you've typed up to this point, what is the most likely next three letters? That is
Right.
literally how all of AI works. It's all about predicting language, but only the next character. And somehow or another, it's a computer that you can converse with like it's a human.
Yeah.
So, what are we up to now? We've
Yeah.
realized that right now, to coach a person, we call it level 7 1.0, right? Our company is called Level 7 High Performance. We're here to raise the consciousness of the world, starting with high performers. What is a high performer? A person self identified. I don't identify high performers, they identify themselves. A person who pursues excellence in their work and in their life. Many people pursue excellence in their work, but not their life. I'm a work and life guy because how you do anything is how you do everything. As above, so below. As within, so without. Right? I go back to this a lot.
Yeah.
So, what are we doing now? My wife is the head of our division on sports, and sports market is nascent. There are mental performance coaches at the well-funded level, such as the Olympics, professional baseball, professional football. I don't think basketball has it. I'm not sure the NFL has contract coaches, but not staff coaches. But and like Texas A&M has one. Very well-funded baseball, football, and basketball men's programs have them.
Hmm.
So we know that we need to produce data that proves it works so coaches, administrators can kick over the resultant budget because they want
Hmm.
to win games. Well,
Yeah.
if I'm sitting in front of a person to coach them, it's too expensive for sports. It's just they're not going to spend the money. We already tried. And so we need to get the data and we need to scale. So how do we bring the price down? AI. So we tried to figure out how can Page go from serving 15 people as a full load of clients to 50 or more. AI. So we built an engine that AI is the coach and we can see it. It's called human on the loop. So I can look at it, Paige can look at it, but it's not our attention is not required for the system to work and to catalog the information. That's how we're going to reach more people and help them be better sports, help them be better at business because we are using the AI product toward business as well. And once we get that data, then we can render it, we can anonymize it, and then we can actually prove that it works. We can also provide, let's say you, Jeff, are the head coach of I don't know, lacrosse team. You got
Hmm.
40 guys and you've got 20 of them using it and you want to know how the team is. Well, we'll have a screen that says your mental readiness as a team is this. Here's why, all of that. So the coach can make strategic decisions based on the information in the mental performance. So the next ridgeline is AI enabled coaching for more people. We're probably a year to 2 years for like full adoption of that. We're more like in the beta and minimum viable product. It does exist. I use it every day. I
Cool.
I built one of the two pillars of it. I'm not qualified to do software engineering, so we have a software engineering team. We have an AI lead, and who is also a spiritual aspirant. So the last thing I'll say about our company is if they work here or they work for us, they are an aspirant. We only use contractors. We've got two marketing experts, one for me and one for my wife, Paige. They're both spiritual aspirants. Every person in this company has a coach and uses our AI system.
Very cool.
So that's what we're doing for the world. And we're here to help companies and teams identify and coach and lead their high performers. And hopefully the people who are self-identified average performers, whatever the other group is. We don't even have a name for them because we don't want to diminish them.
Hmm.
But our attention is on the people who, like Michael Jordan, were in the gym at 6 a.m. the night after or the morning after his championships. That's who we're looking to help because there's less people like that in the world, and there's not as much service for them.
Yeah. Well, hopefully everyone can get inspired by this and start to be the author of their own reality, their own life.
Yeah.
As we wrap this thing up, let people know where can they find you if they want to try a session with you. Is there an option if someone's a new client to get like a you mentioned the first session for
Yep.
possibly for free, and how can people check that out if they're interested?
Yep. So you can find us at level7highperformance.com, all the long versions of everything, one word. That's our website. We have a little system at the bottom that says contact us. We answer that, by the way, personally, because we're just not too big to do that. Um, the other way is you can reach out to me on Instagram. I'm Nate underscore the underscore coach. And then page is page Reeve underscore coach. And those are on Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm the Nate Reeve. That's a transformational coach on LinkedIn. So we're easy to find. I answer my DMs. And yeah, a discovery call. If you're genuinely interested in this type of work, then yeah, a discovery call is a great way to see if I'm a fit for you and if you're a fit for me. Yeah, that's what we do.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast, man. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for everything.